Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Group 8 and we are going to tackle about the moral doctrine, virtue, and natural law of St. Thomas. Thomas's moral doctrine is primarily eudaimonistic and virtue-based. For him, rational appetite is the will. Properly, human action proceeds from and is under the control of intellect and will. A desired good provides the motive for initiating and completing some act. Given the complexity of human life and the goods appropriate to it may well happen that a particular action may be judged to be good in many ways, and yet also bad in others. There is one single ultimate human good that provides an ordering of all other human goods as partial in relation to it, namely happiness. When Aristotle sought to isolate the human good, he employed the so-called function argument. If one knows what a carpenter is or does, he has the criteria for recognizing a good carpenter. If then man as such has a function, we will have a basis for deciding whether someone is a good human being. Thomas argues that there is one single end for all human beings, and that is happiness. He distinguishes in the Summa Theologiae between the imperfect happiness of this life and the perfect happiness of the next life in beatitude or union with God. He describes the life in accord with the reason and virtue in this life as imperfect. He must be suggesting that it is in some sense faulty or not true. Real happiness is something other. Aquinas ultimately finds Aristotle's function argument unsatisfying, insofar as the result of the function argument is supposed to be a claim that happiness consists in a complete life lived in accord with the reason and virtue. Some interpretation fails on a number of counts. First, it misunderstood Thomas's use of imperfect, which does not mean faulty or false. It can mean not as great by comparison, as in the claim of the human beings are imperfect with regards to the angels. It can also mean incomplete in the constitution of some overall good. Aristotle himself says that perfect happiness is to be associated with the divine. Thus, Aquinas does not claim for himself the distinction between imperfect and perfect happiness, but attributes it to Aristotle. Another teaching of Thomas is distinguishing acts of man from human acts. Acts of man are acts shared in common by man and other animals. It might be as important as the beating of his heart or as trivial as the nervous tapping of his fingers, while the human act is one which proceeds from and is under the control of reason and will. Thomas points out that the denial of the ultimate end of human action reduces to the claim that there is no end to human seeking at all, that it is pointless. This analysis has not gotten attention it deserves. The implication is that it is self-evident that there is an ultimate end, which is why denials of it must plunder in incoherence. What binds together all the acts that humans perform is the overarching goodness they seek in this, that, and the other thing. That overarching goodness, what Thomas calls the ratio bonitatis, is the ultimate end.
Virtue. St. Thomas Aquinas' account of virtues formally echoes Aristotle's. Both are about the nature of a virtue and many specific virtues. To start off, virtues are developed habits of powers disposing agents to good actions. Since human actions are subject to the rule of human reason and will, human virtues reside in the various powers that are subject to the rule of reason and will. As developed dispositions, they stand as intermediate states between the powers simply and full-blown exercises of those powers. A virtue is a kind of mean between excess and defect in the exercise of a power. So, yung actions, nakadepende siya sa human reason and will and connected yung human virtues doon. For example, yung binigay ni St. Thomas Aquinas na example is about eating. Siyempre, yung controlled na tao, kinakain niya lang yung kung ano yung sapat para sa kanya. Pursuing neither too much would lead to gluttony nor little, which would lead to starvation. Some people say that St. Thomas Aquinas is simply repeating what Aristotle have taught, but that is a mistake. Isa na sa tinuro ni St. Thomas Aquinas is yung twofold happiness. Isa sa twofold happiness is yung achievable by a human agent in this life through the exercise of the power he or she is endowed with by nature. Sabi ni St. Thomas Aquinas, para siyang human nature, and the second one is the beatitude, a happiness not to be found perfectly in this life but only in the next. It consists in the intellectual vision of God and all things in God. It is described as a participation in the life of divinity itself, as the essence of God himself is united by the light of glory to the intellect of the human being, a union with God that results in the experience of ultimate and final joy, or the light of the will. It is not utterly foreign to human nature. In effect of that, the supernatural power of God elevates or expands the powers of intellect and will to a kind of completion beyond themselves and yet not foreign to them. So, the distinction of a twofold happiness should not be thought of as involving two fundamentally distinct goals or ends of human life. The second supernatural happiness is seen as a kind of surpassing perfection of the first. So, the distinction of a twofold happiness in human life leads to a distinction between the natural virtues and the theological virtues. Natural virtues, tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, pertain to the happiness of this life that is proportionate to human nature. Under that are moral virtues and intellectual virtues. Moral virtues are the habits that perfect the various powers concerned with human appetites, including rational appetite, conferring upon them an aptness for the right use of those appetites. Yung example na trait are courage, justice, honesty, compassion, temperance, and kindness. While intellectual virtues perfect the intellect and confer an aptness for the good work of the intellect, which is the apprehension of truth. Yung example na traits are open-mindedness, intellectual rigor, intellectual humility, and inquisitiveness. Sa cardinal natural virtues, merong apat. Yun yung prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. Number 1, prudence. It is an intellectual virtue since it bears upon the goal of truth and the good ordering of action. Under prudence is number 1, concupiscent. It inclines one toward what is suitable and away from what is harmful to human bodily life. Temperance is the cardinal virtue that pertains to it. The second one is irascible. It inclines one toward resisting those things that attack human bodily life. Courage is the cardinal virtue that pertains to it. Yung pangalawa sa cardinal natural virtue is justice. It is a virtue of the rational appetite or will. And yung last two, yung temperance and courage, pinagsama siya. These are ordered toward and perfect the good of the individual as such, while justice is ordered toward and perfects the good of others in relation to the individual. Yung theological virtues naman, ito yung beatitude, and they cannot be acquired by human effort. Ito yung faith, hope, and love. Sabi ni St. Thomas Aquinas, along with the infusion of the theological virtues, holds that natural virtues are infused along with them. So, meron tayong tinatawag na infused natural virtues and acquired natural virtues. Yung infused natural virtue, hindi siya nakukuha by human effort although they may be strengthened by it. Yung example dyan is yung misericordia or mercy. It is a virtue that pertains to suffering with others and acting to alleviate their suffering, or to pity or sympathize with others. Acquired natural virtue, on the other hand, are the corresponding virtues that can be acquired by human effort without the gift of divine grace. Hindi nabubura ng isang kasalanan ang acquired natural virtues. The infused natural virtues differ in important respects from the corresponding acquired virtues because as infused they point toward the supernatural end, and the mean in acquired virtue is fixed by human reason while the mean in the infused virtue is according to the divine rule. Yung binigay ni St. Thomas Aquinas na example is acquired and infused temperance. Acquired temperance is like pushing a person to eat enough food para maging healthy siya and hindi i-harm yung body niya. While yung infused temperance is like restraining oneself. Yung infused natural virtues are charity, hope, faith, and love. Yung charity, it is the love of God and neighbor in God. It resides in the will. Yung hope, it is the desire for the difficult but attainable good of eternal happiness or beatitude. Nagre-reside din siya sa will. Yung faith, it is an intellectual assent to revealed supernatural truths that are not evident in themselves or through demonstration from truths evident in themselves. So it resides in the intellect. While yung love, it connotes to the relation of your intellect to the will's desire to direct yourself in love. So, believing in God goes well beyond believing that there is a God. So, magkaiba po yung paniniwala kay God and yung paniniwala na may God. In beatitude and felicity, the fulfillment of intellect and will, respectively, the virtues of faith and hope fall away and do not exist. For one now sees with the intellect what one believed, and has attained what one hoped for with the will. Only charity abides. Beatitude and felicity, sinasabi na hindi na kailangan ng isang tao ng hope and faith since na-fulfill na siya. Like, wala nang hahanapin pa and nanaisin pa since fulfilled naman na. So, ang kailangan na lang natin is yung love of God and love of neighbor in God.
Now we proceed to natural law. Natural law, as defined by Oxford Dictionary, is a body of unchanging moral principles regarded as a basis for all human conduct. It means that this law is innate within each of us, and it is not derived from any outside force like society. For example, we have a natural drive within ourselves to eat, drink, and sleep. Next is St. Thomas Aquinas' natural law theory. There are 4 different types of laws contained in his natural law theory, namely eternal law, natural law, human law, and divine law. First is the eternal law. It is the law that God imparted to his creations to know his rational plans and the purpose of all things in this world. Once you have fulfilled your purpose in this life, that is the fulfillment of the eternal law. An example of following the eternal law is by fulfilling the 10 Commandments. God created us in the likeness of his image, so as his sons and daughters, we must obey him, as this is our purpose in life, to honor and glorify God in everything that we do. The next law is the natural law. For St. Thomas Aquinas, natural law is God giving man reason to guide them in their acts. Only humans have been blessed by God with the gift of reasoning, and this is what sets us apart from other creatures that have been created by God. This means that acting according to reason means that we are partaking in the natural law. There are 4 precepts of natural law, namely, protect and preserve human life, reproduce and educate one's offspring, know and worship God, and live in a society. The master principle behind natural law is for man to do good and avoid all evil. That is why man is gifted with reasoning, because although man is innately good, they must learn to understand evil so that they could avoid it at all costs. The third law is the human law, which are also called as secondary precepts. These are the laws created by people for the people. For example, laws made by the government, clubs, societies, organizations, and etc. Some characterize it as an apparent good because some human laws are not in accordance with the natural law. And lastly, the divine law. These are laws given by God. It is also known as the mysteries. These laws cannot be changed because these laws were given by God, and this helps us towards our proper end, which is with God. Now we go to instincts and reason. All creatures made by God have instincts. These instincts tells us what is good for us, so we are naturally inclined to the good. But as stated earlier, as humans have reasoning, so we are able to think it through and not just solely rely on our instincts.
Application to the self. It helps us to reflect on our real purpose in this world, and also it helps us to become a better person. To the community, it helps us to unify people to work for the better good. And that is all for today. Thank you for listening.